What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Huddle Wisdom Podcast. My name is Davin. I'm a child forensic psychiatrist, and today we're going to be tackling a topic that might make you feel uncomfortable, but it addresses a genuine concern that parents have shared with me over the years, often behind closed doors with hushed tones. Today's episode is called How Not to Raise a Psycho. Before you panic or send me really angry emails, Devin, you can't say the word psycho. Let me just clarify. We're not suggesting that your child is destined to become a psychopath, but it's addressing those moments when parents worry that they're raising a child who lacks empathy and consideration for others. So, those moments when your child pushes another child at the playground and they don't seem to be particularly bothered. And then when they laugh at someone else's pain, you run and hide because you know that other people will look at that child and judge you for your terrible parenting. You are raising a psychopath. Because these kids, they don't seem to be moved by consequences. Well, that's not entirely true. And we're going to explore some of this as we go along further. Uh, we will look at what is normal development. What is normal developmental behavior. And then we're going to look at genuine red flags. Things that should cause us concern. All right. So let's start by addressing what is really happening when parents worry about raising a little psychopath. This fear is usually something that emerges when we witness our children act in ways that seem callous, manipulative, and sometimes seemingly without remorse. Um, just last month, a mother came into my office in tears. Her young boy had deliberately broken his sister's favorite toy and showed no remorse whatsoever, or we believe he was showing no remorse whatsoever. In fact, he even smiled, and then when his sister cried, um, uh, the mother asks me, what's wrong with him? Is he going to grow up to be a psychopath? And we actually started talking about that TV series, Adolescence. I don't know if you've seen it. I haven't seen it, but people keep recommending it to me. But my response is always, I don't really want to think about work when I'm at home, so I haven't watched it, and I don't intend to. I deal with all that stuff at work anyway, so I have enough entertainment at work. This mother's concerns are really common, and it's much more common than you might think or care to admit to. But here is what is important to understand: empathy develops gradually throughout childhood, even through adulthood. It's not an innate, fully formed trait that that some people have and others don't. From a neurological perspective, empathy involves multiple brain regions working together, particularly the prefrontal cortex. So that's this little piece of brain in the front of your head here. It isn't fully developed until our mid 20s, even further, maybe. If you've had things like injuries to the prefrontal cortex, or if you know people that have been in accidents, sometimes you might see a change in their personality. Their ability to relate to people can be different. Or if you know people who have had issues with the way their brain prunes itself or um, develops, and you might see differences in the way they relate to people and the way they empathize with other people. So for children, normally what happens is when they go through this developmental pruning process, their brain is technically undergoing renovations or pruning, like we talked about in our previous episode. Your child's brain is still building the neural architecture that is necessary for sophisticated empathy. So it takes time to develop empathy. There are three key components of empathy that I'd like to talk with you about right now. And these develop at different rates. The first is cognitive empathy. This is probably the easier aspect to understand. It involves understanding that others have different thoughts and feelings. That's cognitive empathy. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to get that. The second is emotional empathy. This is a little bit trickier, but it's still not that tricky to understand. Some people find it really hard to use emotional empathy. There are different rates at which people develop this aspect of their empathy, but it's essentially feeling what others can feel. Um, the third part is probably the trickiest aspect to understand. I call it spiritual empathy. I'm not talking about the Holy Spirit. Spiritual empathy, it's being moved to help when others are suffering. That sense of feeling like you have to do something, something within you is inspired to do something for someone else. It also speaks to a degree of discernment. It is what allows you to read the room, so to speak, and go with the ebbs and flows of someone's emotional rhythms. Spiritual empathy. It's hard to put your finger on it. It's kind of ethereal. Uh, but it can be developed, even though it is not that easy for me to articulate what it is. But I call it spiritual empathy. It's kind of beyond feeling. It transcends feeling. It transcends thoughts. It's kind of spiritual, if I can use that word again. Sorry, it's a bit circular. A toddler might show emotional empathy by crying when another child cries, but they lack that cognitive understanding of why. And then you might have another child, an older child, that might intellectually understand someone is sad, but not feel particularly moved by that. They don't have that spiritual empathy. But then when you talk to them about what's going on, they might have some cognitive understanding. So they've got the cognitive, emotional empathy pieces down pat, but the spiritual empathy aspect still needs development. It isn't pathological, it's just developmental. What parents often mistake for concerning behavior is actually their child's struggles to integrate these different components of empathy while simultaneously managing their own intense emotions. Like, oh my gosh, Johnny's just pushed a kid on the playground. They're gonna turn into that kid on adolescence, and it's just, we're gonna be it's gonna be terrible. Just wait. Just look back. Kick back. Think about this. Cognitive, emotional, spiritual empathy. These things are all developing at different rates. Johnny's not quite there yet. Okay, he's 6. And then you add anxiety to this mix, right? Yours and your child's, and behaviors can look even more alarming. Which brings me to my next point. Many kids who appear callous or indifferent are actually experiencing significant anxiety or perhaps sensory overload. Their seeming lack of empathy is actually a defense mechanism. And often, what looks like the absence of care is actually the presence of overwhelm, sensory overwhelm. We've all been there when we're all very, very stressed and upset about stuff. It's very difficult for us to tap into our empathy because we are in fight or flight mode and it's survival. We need to survive first before we can empathize with someone else. It's not pathological, it's just development and it's natural. There are ways, of course, to park your fight flight responses in a healthy way so that then you can empathize with someone else. And there's also ways for you to empathize with yourself, which settles your limbic system. More on that in a later episode, I think. I'm getting off topic now. Let's talk about some red flags. I've talked about what is normal development, what you should expect. But now let's actually let me just step back and talk a little bit further about um, normal development. I'll give you some examples. This might help anchor us in our understanding about this. So, how do you distinguish between normal developmental behavior and what are genuine causes for concern? Okay, let's talk about toddlers. Kids from age 1 to 3. So, normal behaviors might include things like limited impulse control. They just grab toys because they want it, pushing because they want the toy from another kid, difficulties with sharing. It's another side of the same coin. The famous, that's mine, no, that's mine. And then apparent enjoyment at others' distress, which is often actually just curiosity or misunderstanding. You see this with people who love slapstick comedy. They have a hard time understanding that other people feel pain. So all they see is just the funniness with someone getting smashed in the head when they've tripped over. And at this age, empathy is in its infancy, literally at its earliest stages. Some adults don't develop beyond infancy. The ones I'm talking about. But hang on, let me just say this: when we are in heightened states of stress or emotion, we all can regress. I mean, think about those times when you're stuck in traffic, right? And someone cuts you off, right? Now you're in fight, flight, and your ability to access your empathy gets cut off as well because now it's just survival, right? But now you know what's going on. Now it's your responsibility to go and learn about this, learn about yourself, and do better. We're all trying to do better here. Okay, toddlers, they're just beginning to understand that others have separate experiences from their own. Just starting. When a child laughs at another kid falling down, they're not being malicious. And often they don't understand that the concept of pain in other people. Just yet. Not quite yet. Preschoolers, 3 years to 5 years of age, normal behaviors might be lying to avoid consequences. And we all do this, right? Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Difficulties regulating emotions when frustrated, just like adults. Selective empathy. So sometimes they can access their empathy and sometimes they struggle to do that. Caring deeply about a friend or someone they relate to is easier, and they may seem indifferent to strangers, just like adults too, right? So you could argue that we sometimes function as preschoolers, which is true. Magical thinking about cause and effect. By this age, children are starting to develop what we call theory of mind. And this is the understanding that others have different thoughts and feelings to us. But this understanding is still in development, still undergoing pruning, renovations, still developing. For example, a preschooler might tell elaborate lies about their teacher being mean to them. And you you can see how this plays out at home. The teachers then become concerned, right, about this, and then they go and talk to the teacher. Why are you being mean to our son Johnny? He's such an angel. Uh, until we discover that kids have a hard time distinguishing between what actually happened and what he feared might happen, um, you're constantly having to play detective. So just understand that happens for kids. They have a hard time distinguishing between what actually happens and what they fear might happen. They kind of confuse the two things. It's not manipulation. They're not lying about the teacher's actions. They're just experiencing what we call developmental confusion. School age kids, 6 to 9 years of age, normal behaviors might include things like testing boundaries, and they might become more strategic about that. Again, they're not being Machiavellian or manipulative, or acting like a psychopath that's planning to destroy the planet. They're just testing things out, and they're learning how to do this strategically, because that's just what kids do. That's normal. They start to do things like do social comparison, and then they start to exhibit competitive behavior. This is all normal stuff, but it has to be guided, and it is our responsibility to help our children to do that. Occasional meanness or exclusion as they navigate social hierarchies. Again, it is normal. It is painful. It is distressing, and it causes a lot of anxiety for parents like ourselves, but it's normal. However, it does not take away the fact that it can be painful and it can be distressing. We just have to work through that. Knowing some of this stuff and uh, journeying with me on Huddle Wisdom, I'm confident that we can help each other navigate these very difficult and challenging aspects of growing up. Empathy fluctuates at these ages. So again, at this age, children are developing or starting to develop more sophisticated empathy. They test things out, they get burnt every now and then, and they learn. Kids whose prefrontal cortexes take longer to learn from consequences because of various factors will struggle with this. But with time, most of the time, they do start to develop this. Some kids just take a lot longer. If you do my programs, I believe it does speed up the process. I know this, but it's anecdotal. People that have done my programs tell me this. I've done my program because I developed it out of my own personal experience. I actually didn't want to develop a program, but I made my own programs for myself, although I didn't know it at the time. And then I just put it together, and people seem to like it, and it's on offer. So I encourage you to go and check it out, Huddle Wisdom at huddlewisdom.com. All right, so at this age, children are still developing their empathy, and they're testing things out. One important distinction is between children who can show empathy when they're calm, but lose this capacity when they're upset. And that's completely normal. Like I was saying before, we all lose our cool, and our prefrontal cortex. It shuts off temporarily. And then you've got children who consistently show no distress at others' suffering, regardless of context. So you've got kids that show empathy when calm, but lose this capacity when they're upset, versus children who consistently show no distress at others' suffering, regardless of context. Across time, across different domains, and different settings, and different people. Okay? It's very rare from my experience, to actually see children who consistently show no distress at other people's suffering, regardless of context. This is a potential red flag. It's rare. Some people who come to my clinic swear that their kids are burgeoning psychopaths. Often, more often than not, that's not the case. Okay? Because there will be a place where they are blind to seeing their kid actually do well in. Um, because they're so caught up in their own anxieties and emotions that little Johnny is going to turn into a psychopath, right? Tweens and teenagers, 10 to 17 years of age, normal behaviors include things like increased self-focus, self-absorption. And then they're testing adult boundaries again, much more intensely. They're doing more risk-taking behaviors, and they show fluctuating empathy based on peer influence. Teenagers are navigating significant brain renovations at this age, even more so than before. It seems more obvious. And they're also under other complex pressures, social, academic. It's like a layer cake. It's really difficult for teenagers these days. And then you compound the impact of social media on teenagers' development. It gets messy. So you can see that there's lots of opportunities for friction points. I talk about friction points in other episodes, and I talk about it in Huddle Wisdom. I won't go into all the detail there about what that is. But essentially, it's a mismatch between a child's capacity to cope with environmental demands or expectations. Okay, so I'll just cover off some genuine red flags again. Sorry, I've already talked about a couple, but we'll talk about some red flags now across age. So while much is developmental and the function of renovations in the frontal lobes, there are signs that do warrant some attention. Okay, so here we go. Consistent cruelty to animals. Cruelty to animals by itself may not necessarily be a sign that your child is going to become a psychopath. Okay, it's just an indicator. So if they're cruel to animals, what else are they cruel to? Maybe they're not cruel to other things. Maybe there's room for hope there. Persistent lack of remorse, even after cooling down. So most children, when they're calm, their empathy, they can access their empathy more readily. But some kids don't. But it's rare. It's rare. I'll talk about this in more detail soon. Calculated, proactive aggression versus reactive aggression. Okay, you need to try and think about what is reactive aggression and what is cold, calculated, proactive aggression. Sometimes it's not easy to discern this. People who act out with reactive aggression may sometimes feel conflicted. When the fight flight energy drops off, empathy comes back up, conflict arises, and then they get reminded of why they were angry in the first place, and they move back into reactive aggression. Some kids, and I've seen this only a handful of times throughout the last 17 years I've been I've been working in psychiatry, and it's they are out there. They are out there, but it's rare. Persistent inability to form attachments. So they're quite comfortable in their own company, and they don't mind it. Consistent pleasure derived from other people's pain. It's rare. I have seen it. but it's rare. I have to keep emphasizing that these things are rare because I don't want you to freak out, right? Um, it's more likely than not that your the worry you have about your child developing into a psychopath is probably just normal developmental stuff working itself out. Think about one other red flag. You have kids that do elaborate scheming, strategic manipulation, far beyond their developmental capacities, the norms. Even with these red flags, though, context matters a lot. A child who shows these behaviors after trauma, neglect, or in response to their own victimization, and they deserve compassionate intervention, right? Not judgment or fear. Yes. So context does matter. You need to think about that. Anxious kids also often appear self-focused or even oppositional because their nervous system is in survival mode. We can't underestimate the impact that anxiety has on someone's limbic system, and then how that shuts off the prefrontal cortex. It's our brains are just rigged up for survival and threat detection because of, and then especially if you've had some trauma, it's even more pronounced. Whether you're a big child or a small child or an adult, it's all the same. A child who is anxious about social rejection might preemptively reject others before they get rejected themselves. A child who is overwhelmed by sensory input may appear callous and cold and belligerent when they're actually just in shutdown mode, protecting themselves. So think about context. Bearing the above in mind, we should not then be asking whether your child is a psycho, but rather whether your child is showing developmental progression in their capacity for empathy, because sometimes that is inconsistent and it fluctuates. Okay, now what shapes the development of empathy? Single most powerful factor in developing empathy is experiencing empathy oneself. Children learn empathy primarily through having their own emotional experiences validated and understood. Here are 4 key environmental influences. The first is parenting style and empathy. Sorry, oh my gosh, what I'm saying. The first is parenting style. Research shows that different parenting approaches have distinctive impacts on the development of empathy. You have authoritarian parenting, where you have high control, low warmth. That sort of parenting style tends to produce children who follow the rules, but might develop lower emotional intelligence and struggle with perspective taking. Think about permissive parenting, low boundaries, high levels of warmth, often creates children who have emotional awareness, yes, but they struggle with self-regulation and considering others' needs, especially when there's conflict with their own desires. And then you have neglectful parenting, low boundaries, low levels of warmth. This is associated with significant problems with empathy development and emotional regulation. The best one is authoritative parenting, where you have clear boundaries and high levels of warmth. This consistently produces the best outcomes for empathy development. Again, I'm talking about this in general terms and on average, right? There are always exceptions. And then you have that survivorship bias thing going on, right? Like, those people that talk about free range parenting. You only ever hear about the survivor stories, the ones that say, man, I free range parent and it's amazing. It's wonderful. So good. You don't hear about all the other not so great outcomes that happens. Okay, so these children, authoritative parenting, the children of authoritative parents, clear boundaries, high warmth. These children consistently in research and in practice learn that emotions matter and that behavior has consequences. There's a psychologist. Her name's called, and I'm sorry if I pronounce this incorrectly. Grazina Kochanska she showed that children. She's done a lot of work, both academic and also she's written a couple of books. Children with different temperaments respond differently to these parenting styles. All the ones I just mentioned. Children with bold, fearless temperaments particularly need clear, consistent boundaries and warmth to develop empathy. Meanwhile, highly sensitive children need more emotional coaching and reassurance. So, different kids need individualized approaches. Who would have thought? But Davin, there's just so much to think about. I've got different kids at home. I don't have time to think about all their different needs. Well, you have to. But the safest route, if you really don't have time, is authoritative parenting for everyone. It's a good starting point, and then you make adjustments to the individual child's needs as you go along. Number 2, the role of modeling. Modeling the stuff that you want to see yourself. Kids are like sponges. They are attuned to how we treat other people, not just how we treat them. They observe how we talk to others, how we respond to other people's distress, how we talk about people who are not there, how we handle conflict in our relationships, and whether our actions match our stated values. Sorry, I have my little dog here. Hello. Sometimes I will have patients who have been referred for so-called callous behavior. And sometimes I notice in the room parents consistently interrupting each other, interrupting me, dismissing concerns, over talking over the top. And they make subtle put down comments. And you wonder, where does their callous behavior come from? The child's behavior isn't so much a mystery. It's not a mysterious pathology. It was just a reflection of what's going on at home. And sometimes it's not as obvious, but it is there. Hello. Number 3, family emotional climate. The overall emotional tone of your household has a profound impact on empathy development. So we're talking about emotional overreactivity, where you teach children to either shut down their emotions or become emotionally dysregulated themselves. And then you might have a family that is perfused with emotional dismissal, and parents say things like, you're fine. Stop crying. It's not a big deal. Just get over it. Swallow some concrete pills and get over it. It teaches kids that feelings are not valid or important. Just brush them aside. Just move on. You're fine. Stop crying. Just carry on. Okay? Carry on. Emotional coaching. This is, where you have homes that you see there's a lot of validation of feelings while also teaching appropriate expression and problem solving. when I was growing up, I had lots of friends. Some were more friends than others, and I would observe how their parents treated them. And there was one family that I envied. Um, Both their parents, you know, great communicators, um, warm, firm boundaries. The kids respected them, and they respected the kids. You know, there was this kind of even toing and froing and bantering and, you know, respectful arguing. Um, and the kids, no surprise, they became very successful. And then you have people that don't have that, and it's a real struggle. Dr. John Gottman's research shows that kids raised in with um, that sort of emotional coaching, are much healthier. They do better academically. They have stronger friendships and show more empathy to others. So there is something about the vibe of the environment. It makes a huge difference. Number four, talk about the role of attachment. Um, this should come as no surprise, or it shouldn't come as a new idea or concept to you. But secure attachment provides the substrate, the foundation for empathy. What that means is that when children's needs are consistently met with attunement, their brains develop optimal neural pathways for understanding others' experiences. I'll tell you what I do soon. I'm just going to take a quick break. Okay, we're back. Right. Where was I? Um, okay, I was talking about the neurobiology of attachment and stress. Secure attachment provides the substrate for empathy, the neurological foundation for empathy. What that means is kids, they need consistent attunement. Their brains develop optimally uh, when they have optimal attunement. It allows their neurons to wire for understanding other people's experiences. Excuse me. Conversely, neglect and chronic stress can also literally shape brain development. Kids living with chronic stress develop heightened threat sensitivity and reduced capacity for emotional processing. And sometimes when they become adults, they can they can experience this emotional shutdown in the face of a perceived conflict or threat, and they can appear cold and belligerent. It's not the same as them not having empathy for other people. Um, they are in survival mode. Their brains are just too busy trying to ensure survival to develop sophisticated empathy. The good news is that the brain is remarkably plastic. So children who even so even if children have experienced early adversity, they can still develop healthier empathy with consistent, optimal, supportive caregiving. What is important to understand is that kids experiencing anxiety are often in a state that makes empathy difficult. Their nervous system is so focused on detecting threat and getting rid of threat that they're not able to connect with other people. This is why addressing anxiety, to me, is a prerequisite for nurturing empathy. If you want to address this effectively, you need to check out my Making Sense of Anxious Kids program. It's on the website, huddlewisdom.com. You can find it. You can do you don't have to do my program. You can do other ones, but please learn to address anxiety in children. That's all I say. That's all I will say for now. Throughout all the environmental influences, there is a common thread. Children develop empathy when they feel safe, and that also means being in an environment where their anxiety is optimally, what's the word? Cared for, where they are seen, where they are soothed, when their emotional states and their emotional needs are met with consistency and compassion. They develop the internal models, the internal resources to then extend that same compassion to others. Let's talk about some practical ways for you, practical ways you can implement what am I saying? I'm so sorry. We're going to talk about some practical strategies you can implement. That's better. You can implement today to nurture empathy and pro-social behavior. Okay, the first is emotion coaching, which I alluded to earlier. It involves these steps, by and large, in general terms. Being aware of your child's emotions. Maybe that goes without saying. But you need to be aware that your children have their own emotions. You need to recognize that their emotional expression might be an opportunity for connecting with them. Listen empathically and validate their feelings. It's not the same as approval. It's not the same as giving permission for bad behavior. Help your child name their emotions. When they develop a language around emotions, they are much better able to master their emotions. Setting limits while problem solving is a good skill. So, for example, an example of emotional dismissal versus emotional coaching. Okay, so emotional dismissal is the opposite of emotional coaching. Here's an example. Stop crying, Johnny. The toy is already broke. Getting upset will not fix it. Maybe that's a fine response. It's certainly not a fine response in my household. Emotional coaching is more like this. Oh man, Johnny, I can see you're quite sad. You're quite bummed out that your toy broke. It's hard when something you love gets damaged. I get it. It's okay to feel sad about that. But when you're ready, Johnny, we can talk about whether we can fix it or if we need to say goodbye to that toy. You see the difference? The first response teaches kids to suppress their emotions. The second recognizes that your kid has emotions and it teaches them about emotional literacy while maintaining boundaries, and you're also maintaining a degree of warmth. So this is authoritative parenting. Number 2, validating emotions while setting clear boundaries. So remember that validating feelings does not mean approving behavior. The formula that I use goes something like this. Number 1, acknowledge the feeling. Number 2, set the boundary. 3, offer an alternative. Just like the coaching example I used above with the broken toy. Here's another example. Hey man, I can see that you're really peeved at your sister. It's okay to feel peeved off, angry. But it's not okay to hit her. You can tell her you are angry with your words, or you can stomp your feet. I mean, that's better than hitting. Not ideal because you hurt your own feet and you're making noise and it's disturbing me from recording my podcast. And it's okay to feel mad. But here's the boundary. Here's an alternative behavior that you can use instead. You're teaching your child that emotions are acceptable. It's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to hit. So emotions acceptable, not all behaviors are acceptable. It's also reinforcing that they can manage difficult feelings without hurting others or themselves. Number 3, perspective taking. It's a skill. It develops through practice. Not easy, but it can be nurtured. Asking perspective promoting questions is a good place to start. Hey, Johnny, how do you think Sam felt when that happened? Sometimes they don't give you an answer. That's okay. Just keep asking the question. Pointing out emotional cues. Hey, Billy, did you know? Did you notice how her shoulders were slumped when you said that thing? Wondering aloud about other people's experiences is a good technique. It's a good way to ask some questions. I wonder what made the cashier seem so grumpy today. I wonder if she's stressed. There's a lot of people here in the cafe. It's just her today. She seems, I think she's doing a pretty hard job. So it makes sense that she's looking a bit grumpy. Don't you think? Reading fiction together is also a really great way of teaching perspective taking. You know, where and then you kind of pause and you discuss feelings and motivations. Don't dig in too much if you see that they're not responding. Just lightly stop and ask questions and then move on. Don't worry about them answering the question because all you're doing is just planting seeds, just planting little seeds here and there. Role playing different scenarios. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. You need to read the room, read the vibe. All of those habits, they're just examples, but they help children develop the habit of considering others' internal experiences. Number 4, power of repair after conflict. I think Becky Kennedy talks about this a lot. Psychologist, worth looking into. Talks a lot about repair after conflict. So all relationships involve rupture and repair, or some version of those in various ways, depending on context, depending on personality, temperament. Teaching kids how to repair relationships when they've been ruptured is really, really important for empathy development. So here are the steps to healthy repair. One example structure is 1, you acknowledge the nature of the impact of one's actions. Number 2, you express genuine remorse. Number 3, you make amends when possible. Number 4, you commit. You commit to different behavior in the future. As parents, we need to model this ourselves when we make mistakes. Okay? When we make mistakes, and we do make mistakes. Rather than perfect parenting, though, like me and other people say, our children need to see how to take responsibility and how to make things right when things go wrong. It means taking ownership, running with it, and fixing it, or at least trying to fix it. Let's now talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for kindness. You can imagine different scenarios for intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Like buying friendship. That's an extrinsic thing. Intrinsic thing might be I want to hang out with my friend because I value the friendship. something intangible about that. Research shows that rewarding pro-social behavior can actually undermine intrinsic motivation for kindness. Makes sense. Makes sense. But instead, you, you can notice and describe kind behaviors that your children do. Um, for example, you just want to catch them doing kind things. Um, and then I know it's like a classical behavioral um, strategy, but it can help as part of your armamentarium, as part of your toolbox. So notice and describe kind behaviors when you catch it. Matt, I noticed that you shared your snacks with your little sister just now. That's cool. You only had so much, and still you sacrificed a little bit of yours um, to help her out. That's really cool. And then another one is you want to try and connect behavior to values, because sometimes it's not obvious, and we need to make it explicit. Um, Man, you doing that was a really caring thing. So it showed care. It showed that you cared. Um, then you highlight the impact of kindness. Look, she's so happy. Not that her happiness is your responsibility, but the effect of what you did was that she felt whatever that smile is on her face. That you did that. You made that happen. Emphasize identity rather than behavior. So what I mean is, you, Billy, you're the kind of person who notices when others need help. You notice that your sister did not have food in her lunchbox because her dad didn't pack it. You notice that your sister did not have food in her lunchbox. You notice that she was a little bit upset because she was hungry, and then you had some food and you gave her some. That was demonstrating that you care, and the effect of that on her is now she's smiling. You did that. That is amazing. So you're trying to nurture this intrinsic kindness by reinforcing it through those means, using those methods. The next couple that I want to talk about is a bit tricky because it involves managing ourselves. So I want to talk about managing our own triggers. Like earlier on, I talked about that, but I mention it again because I think it's really important that we are mindful of our own emotional triggers, our own reactions, responses. Um, our ability to respond in an empathic way to our children is compromised by our own emotions at various times, and our children are especially potent at activating our anxiety or anger, and very effective at shutting off our empathy, especially when we get triggered. So we need to practice self-regulation. We need to recognize when we are catastrophizing. We need to challenge our black and white thinking. Oh, this means that this Johnny character, my son, has no empathy. He's just an a-hole. What a psycho, right? He's gonna grow up to be a psycho. Wonder where he learned this stuff from. Seek support from your partner. Seek support from other parents. Reach out for help if you're struggling. It's not a failure on your part. Create opportunities for pro-social behavior. Think about family projects, family service projects, caring for pets or plants. Pets are great. They teach us so much, and they offer so many opportunities for us to teach our children about kindness. Let me just pause again. Where was I? I think I was talking about, yeah. So you need to create or try to create opportunities for prosocial behavior. If you have neighbors, um, find ways of how to be neighborly. Um, if you have pets, they're a great way to teach your children about kindness, sharing, managing conflict. And then play. Play is also really useful strategy for teaching children about empathy. Unstructured play with peers and with their um, siblings is one of the most powerful contexts for empathy development. Through play, children learn how to practice negotiation and compromise. They experience the consequences of their actions in real time, live, and they learn to read others' emotional signals. Well, um, most kids learn to do this. Um, they learn to develop reciprocity and what is fair and what is not fair. In our culture, our achievement focused culture, we do undervalue play, in my point of view. Everyone is playing to win and playing not to lose. Uh, but that takes away from the fact that what you're doing is actually just playing. You're just playing. It's not life or death. People forget that sometimes. It's through play that children develop many of the social emotional skills that prevent antisocial behavior later on. All right. So I'll just reiterate. We're coming to the end soon. Empathy, in the way it develops, is not linear. It's not a straight line. Kids, just like adults, will have days when they show compassion, and days when they seem completely self-absorbed. But we have to remind ourselves that the goal is not to achieve perfection. We're not all going to be Mother Teresa. It's growth over time. That's what we want. And we can support that by consistent empathic parenting. So not perfect parenting, but consistent parenting. I should mention times when you need to seriously look at getting help. If you are in any doubt, that's one reason to go and seek help. Here's some other ones. So if your child is displaying persistent behavioral concerns that are not responding to consistent parenting approaches, where the aggression is continuing despite clear consequence in emotional coaching, you're seeing chronic defiance across all settings, most settings, and with different people across time. And it starts to interfere with family function, or you see manipulation that seems calculated beyond developmental norms. Okay, be careful here, because most manipulation is just normal developmental stuff. The type of manipulation I'm talking about is like next level manipulation. Maybe that wasn't a helpful comment. But cold, calculated, aggressive manipulation with no care for other people's feelings could be a red flag. Look for significant change in behavior. A kid that's previously very empathic and then becoming consistently callous. That's not quite right. Something's happened. New emergence of cruelty toward animals or siblings. Again, something's going on. Sudden social withdrawal or peer problems. Persistent emotional flatness or limited emotional range. And perhaps there's anxiety going on, perhaps there's depression, difficulties identifying or expressing feelings. Do they have excess fear or anxiety that interferes with their relationships? Are there parent-child challenges that is characterized by constant conflict? Do you feel persistently hopeless or anger towards your child? So everything that you say to your child is angry. Are you walking on eggshells around a child? If you recognize any of these patterns, I do encourage you to go and seek some assistance. And it's not a failure to do so. Early intervention makes a huge difference in outcomes long term. So go and talk to a child psychologist or a therapist, family therapist, child psychiatrist, parenting coach. By the way, I've said this before, nothing on this podcast should be construed as medical or psychiatric advice. I'm not your psychiatrist, I'm not your doctor. I don't know your situation. Everything on here is just my opinion. So if you're in doubt, please go and see someone. Talk to someone. All right. So, okay. Before I leave, I'll just quickly touch on a couple more things. When you go and seek help, sometimes your children might demonstrate some resistance. So if you're considering professional help, here's some ways in which you can, some things to think about when you're presenting the prospect of seeing a professional person to your child. You frame it positively. Maybe you say something like, this person helps with children and families and helps them to understand feelings and get along better. Lots of families work with therapists to learn new skills, just like how we might work with a coach for sports. I've noticed that things have been hard lately. I've not been the best parent that I could be, and I think this person could really help us figure out how to make things better. Avoid blaming language, so things like, we're going because of your behavior, please don't say that. And you need to participate yourself too. Children benefit the most when parents are actively involved in the therapeutic process. Just remember, again, my friends, I just need to say it again, getting help is not a sign of failure. So let's just recap what we've covered today. I know we've talked quite a long time, and it's probably the longest episode I've done in a long time because there's lots of stuff in here. I think it's really important concepts. I think they're really important concepts to grasp. So yeah, I hope you can appreciate that. Let's recap. So today we've explored developmental, the developmental nature of empathy, how it unfolds gradually and sometimes unevenly throughout childhood. We've distinguished between normal developmental behaviors and what are red flags. We've looked at environmental factors that shape empathy development. We've talked about parenting styles, the vibe, family climate. We've talked about some practical concepts and strategies that you can implement today. But if there's one message I hope that you take away from this episode, and it is this: the fact that you are concerned about raising a kind, empathetic young person is already a positive sign. If you've stayed till the end, I count you as one of those people. Parents who lack empathy themselves rarely worry about their children's empathy development. I've seen this. It's not pretty. Empathy grows through relationship. The consistent, compassionate connection that you maintain with your child even during their most challenging moments. That is the substrate in which empathy can develop and grow. You, your child, we all make mistakes. We will have moments of selfishness, unkindness, callousness, apparently. But these moments do not define us. They do not predict where we are going to go in the future. These are just opportunities for learning and doing better, for developing deeper connection with each other. The question isn't whether you are raising a psycho, it's whether you are creating the conditions in which empathy can grow. So, when you attend to your child's emotional needs, you set clear, consistent boundaries, you model empathic behavior yourself, and you seek help when needed. Join our community, man. Join our community. Uh, you are laying a strong foundation for your child to become a caring, emotionally intelligent person. Thanks for joining me, my friends, for this important conversation, monologue. I hope you take these insights and concepts into your parenting journey with confidence and a bit more clarity. Okay, before we finally wrap up, I know I've said that 3 times already. I want to share something that I've developed specifically for parents navigating these challenges. And if today's episode resonated with you, my audio program, Making Sense of Anxious Kids, takes these concepts much deeper. It's not just another parenting program that promises quick fixes, because it's not a quick fix, but the program itself is comprehensive and quick. I developed it through my own personal experiences of parenting, and also in from my clinical work with lots of families facing these exact struggles. I talk about the neurological foundations of anxiety, empathy, provide frameworks for responding to challenging emotions, behaviors that help you to build connection instead of conflict. People have told me that it's it helps it's helped to improve their relationships at home. It's helped to improve their relationships at work. Go figure. It's supposed to be a parenting program, but it seems to help them professionally as well. Because this stuff is universal. It's not just about understanding your children. It's about understanding people. So if you're worried about raising a child who lacks empathy or consideration for others, I believe, even though this program is about making sense of anxious kids, there's a lot in there that will help you when you're trying to nurture and guide your child who you want to develop empathy and consideration for others. Anxiety is a major issue. If you don't address it, it makes it much harder for kids to develop empathy. So go to huddlewisdom.com, click on the Learn tab, and scroll down, Making Sense of Anxious Kids. When you invest in these skills now, you're not just addressing parenting challenges today, you're actually shaping the kind of person your child is going to become. That will pay great dividends for you and for the world and for them. For them. I should have said them first. Thank you for joining me today, my friends. Until next time, my name is Davin, and I'm reminding you that the greatest wisdom often comes from our deepest parenting struggles. I'll talk to you next time, my friends. Thanks for joining us here on Huddle Wisdom.